Um, it's funny you say that because I totally agree with you that just because an author creates characters doesn't mean he knows everything about them. And I find that a lot of readers are disappointed when I say that, and they don't quite believe it. Part of the reason is because I've written a sequel, and almost everyone wants to know what happened to them. There is I don't want to give away the spoiler, but at the end of the novel, there is a tremendous question as to what happens to these two people as they go into the future. And so when I tell people that I've written a sequel, they say, "Well, what happened? Did they do this? Did they do that?" And I said, "Well, you know what? When I finished the book, I really didn't know. I had to make a choice in writing the sequel, but I can't say with confidence that's definitely what would happen going forward." Because it's like life. People do things all the time that your whole life, and they surprise you. You do things, I do things, then I'm saying, why did I do that? So why not a character that you've created, right?
Hey everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have someone here on the show today in one of my most favorite places in the whole wide world. Been there many times. I love New York City. And this author is here to talk about his books, his writings, and how he blends different things together in his books. And he has a legal background. We're going to jump into all things today around Daniel Victor's on the podcast. Daniel, so glad to have you here on the show. Welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Thank you, Dave. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be talking with you about my work.
Now, when we met for our pre-chat, you threw something at me that caught me off guard, and I'm like, this is so cool. Your background's in the legal realm. You've done this for many, many years. And you had the chance to work with a very notable television show that, for me growing up, was like my go-to show. And I'd never really even thought about the fact that the show would require a lawyer, but it did. And I just want to celebrate the show because it's such a big part of my life. And it's a big nod to New York City as well, that show. I just love it. Can you tell us a little bit about your legal background in this show in particular?
Sure.
Can you share anything with us?
Sure. So I had a fairly conventional legal career. Started at a big law firm. Then I worked for Columbia University, then Paramount Pictures. And then ultimately, though, I became the general counsel for Sesame Workshop, the creators and producers of Sesame Street, which is now, I don't know, in its 60th year. I don't even know. And that job was, I worked there for 15 years. It was a terrific legal job. In the media industry, you need tons of lawyers. Even the people that do makeup have a contract. Even the people that, bang the cymbals in the songs have a contract. So we had a pretty big legal staff. I tended to focus on a lot of international transactions, and I traveled all over the world doing local versions of Sesame Street, including in such places as China very, very early, Japan, Indonesia, India, Bangladesh, Mexico, all over the Middle East, Israel, Jordan, Egypt, and throughout South America and Europe. And it was a really terrific opportunity for me and a lot of fun and very hard work.
At any point, did they design a puppet just for you that resembled yourself?
No, I wasn't high enough in the hierarchy, but they did it for the chairman of the board.
Excellent. Well, there you go. That would be interesting. Yeah, that sounds like a really fun place and very creative place as well. A lot of amazing people.
It was around averaged of 300 people, and we did business all over the world. And we had an enormous licensing business. As you know, we did motion pictures. They did everything. And it was, as you say, a rite of passage for so many millions of people and their families. I think now it's a far more competitive environment for quality educational preschool shows. And so I think the last 20 years, the workshop has had to work harder to retain its primacy. And a lot of those shows were created in its image. It's an homage to actually putting cognitive and emotional and moral education into the television show for preschoolers.
And for me, as growing up, it also brought a love for New York City as well.
Yeah.
Just seeing that how it was filmed, and those amazing stairs that go up to the front of your house, and seeing all the cast and characters there, the garbage can with Oscar on the sidewalk,
the stoop.
As I walk those streets, the stoop, right? I felt like I was on the set, even though it wasn't actually the set, but you just feel like you're there. And I loved how they brought New York into my home, even up here in Canada. I just love the show.
Yeah, well, I think it was the first show that tried to capture the ambiance of urban America. That was way back in 1968 that it started.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay, so your career as a lawyer in the legal field, that's been an amazing career for yourself as you kind of go through the years. Now you've switched gears, and now you're, as an author, creating books and writing. I'm curious, as a reader, do you ever wrestle with the lawyer side, the legal mind that you have, and the author mind? Like, is this in competition with each other? Do they complement? How does this work? How do you switch from one thing to another thing, like you've done?
I don't feel that my legal experience was at all in conflict with my aspirations to be a writer of fiction. I think lawyers are trained to write precisely and to be clear, which I think is a big plus in terms of writing fiction or nonfiction. And I find that because I write a lot of Jewish-themed novels, which are based in large part on the Talmud, which is a 5,400-page, essentially legal analysis, and also, I would say, ritual examination of essentially the evolution of Judaism. But a lot of it is legal. I find that my experience as a lawyer really helps me understand what it is I'm trying to integrate. My characters also tend to be lawyers at some point. So I obviously base some of my experience. I use some of my experience on my characters.
So when did your author journey actually begin then?
I was an English major and a creative writing minor in college. That's a long time ago. It's over 15 years ago. And I always wanted to be a writer, but life kind of got in the way, including the need to make a living and to raise a family. And over the years, I worked for many, many years on a novel. I worked on my first novel for 30 years, and I just didn't get anywhere with it. I found it very difficult to sit and to find the time, but when I did find the time to sit and actually be productive. But one day around 6 years ago, and I've been retired for 3 years, so I was still working on my own practice, I came across a binder with that novel in it, which I hadn't looked at in almost 10 years. And I recalled it as being just dreadful. When I took it out, I started looking at it. I said, it's not as bad as I recalled. And for some reason, and I'm mystified about it, Dave, I wish I could write a prescription for people who have writer's block. But for some reason, I suddenly found that I could write very, very prolifically. So I finished that novel in 6 months. And then I started the novel we're discussing, The Evil Inclination. I finished that in 9 months. And I had so much momentum on that I finished the first draft of a sequel around 6 months later. Then I wrote another novel. Then I wrote 2 novellas and a collection of short fiction. This is all in 6 years. Now I'm kind of slowing down. But I think, I have some theories as to why suddenly I became, I found the activity of writing to be fun, how I made it fun and made it therefore productive for me.
Again, going back to writing legal documents compared to writing fiction, there's a big gap there. There's a big difference in how you approach the two. Was writing legal documents and working in that field an advantage for you, do you think? Or did you have to relearn how to write?
Again, I don't know whether I had to relearn anything so much as I think the advantage is that lawyers work on deadlines, and
Okay.
so we don't tend to. We can't agonize about every line. We have to spit it out, and then we have to share it with our colleagues, and then we have to revise and check and revise and check, which I think is at least, again, there's 1,000 theories for how to write long or short form fiction, but I think what works best, at least in terms of productivity, is to spit it out, get it on paper, and not look at every sentence that you're writing as you're writing it and question whether you've captured exactly the image or the moment that you're trying to describe. I think it's much more productive to spit it all out and then work on it again and revise it until it gets where it should be. And I think that's a skill that I learned as a lawyer. There's just no luxury to get it all set in your mind, to take 6 months and all set in your mind and then write the perfect draft. Doesn't happen.
Throughout your legal career, I'm sure you had some moments where you felt proud about something that you've been able to accomplish through your practice. There's the satisfaction of doing what you do and helping people. What's the satisfaction and what's the pride in becoming an author and writing? What's the one thing that really kind of stands out to you that makes you kind of go, I'm really happy that I'm now in this stage of my career that I can be an author and write. What's so exciting for you now? What brings you joy?
I think what brings me joy is when I encounter someone who has read the novel. And by the way, I think the biggest challenge for emerging writers, even though I'm old, I'm an emerging writer, is to market your work, which I'm sure you've heard from many authors is a tremendous challenge. But when I do talk to book clubs or to individuals that have read the novel and love the novel, it's just tremendously exciting for me to find out what they took away from it, what touched them, what inspired them. I try to find out what they didn't like, but most people are too gracious to be very explicit about that. But so I find that it's just, my novels also have a lot of ideas in them. They're not just stories, although I think of myself more as a storyteller than a stylist. You know, I'm not, it doesn't interest me that much to describe a sunset in lyrical terms. I'm more into characters and plot-driven ideas, but I also try to integrate ideas. And because, as I said, I write mostly Jewish-themed fiction, most of my readers are Jewish, but not exclusively. And this book, which maybe we'll talk about later, I've had a number of non-Jewish readers who really responded to it positively and felt that it was talking directly to them, which was very, very gratifying for me.
Yeah. And the one thing I would love to kind of touch on as well is how important your faith is, your customs, everything that you've been raised with, what you hold dear as a human walking this earth, feeds into your books, right? It feeds into who you are. How satisfying is it to be able to bring those things that are so meaningful to you and your culture through your writing? Is that something that you really enjoyed, being able to bring that piece out?
You know, I think a lot of authors, if you ask them, like, what audience did you write to or for? Of course, everybody dreams of the crossover audience. I didn't think in those terms. The way I imagined my audience were people who are members of my synagogue. And I have I'm very fortunate. I have a tremendously vibrant community here in Manhattan of what is known as modern Orthodox Jews. And we most of them are affiliated in one form or another with Columbia University because I live in that neighborhood, Morningside Heights. And I wrote the novel as if they would be my readers. And in fact, most of the people in the synagogue have read it, and we discussed it. And I think a lot of them were quite intrigued by the situation described. The protagonist, the male protagonist in the novel, is a 20-year-old Orthodox Jewish kid from Brooklyn. The female protagonist is a 20-year-old Italian Catholic from Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. And it's really a novel about how faith and observance have to struggle in contemporary times with the attractions of a secular world. In that sense, most people who are religious in some sense have experienced that tension between belief and faith, and for Jews, observance, keeping a lot of commandments, and the allure of secular world, whether it's distractions or sexual or drugs or alcohol or whatever it is. And we find that that's a story that's we see played out a lot in religious communities. And I wanted to try to capture that tension and write to that. And when I find people say to me, I was really moved by it, and it reverberated with my experience or the experience of my family, I find that to be very rewarding.
When we met to chat, I kind of came away from our conversation thinking in the terms that this is a book that challenges you to, when you have to make a decision between one way of living or another way of living, and when you get outside information, outside people coming into your life, as a result of, like, for the couple in this book, for example, you're getting a different point of view, and now everything you have to challenge everything you believe. So is that kind of a little bit of the context of what's going on behind the book?
That's exactly what happens. I mean, people have asked me, I'm not from Brooklyn. This really is a book that's grounded in Brooklyn. It takes place exclusively in Brooklyn, and the two protagonists take the subway all over, and that's really where they are. Their neighborhoods are enclaves, insular enclaves. So Angela, who's the Italian Catholic, lives in Bensonhurst, which until fairly recently was almost exclusively Italian Catholic. And Lev, the Jewish protagonist, lives in a part of Flatbush, Brooklyn, which is almost entirely Orthodox. The reason why I chose Brooklyn was because those two neighborhoods exist. And you can live in either one of them and never encounter someone from the other neighborhood. However, there's a city college, Brooklyn College, where those populations mix. And that's where our protagonists meet. And that's where their sudden collision really with each other really is a catalyst for them to question a lot of the assumptions and suppositions that have guided their living and their thinking until that moment.
And that makes me happy, because when you talk about Flatbush, I've been there. I've walked those streets. I've talked to people on the streets, and I just loved every moment of walking through those neighborhoods. It was such an amazing experience, and then to know that you can walk across the block and across the street, and then you're in a totally different area, totally different neighborhood, and how self-contained they are, and how community takes care of community in that environment. Like, you could just tell that everyone had a safe place, and that everyone knew each other, and everyone was on the same team, I guess you could say. Everyone understood each other, and everyone was following the same path. I just felt so welcome there as well, even as an outsider, as a Canadian, this guy walking around, like, who's this guy? But there was such an amazing place to walk. So having that in my mind as I read your book, I'm walking the streets that I walked. So I could have met your character walking those streets as well. So I love that connection for me personally, and I love how you brought that into your story.
Yeah, Brooklyn now, from what I understand, is as much a destination for tourists as Manhattan, because it does have that special ambiance of somehow the whole world is there.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So, how much research did you do for your book? Like, how much, like, for character development and you're talking again, you have the Jewish faith, you have the Catholic faith. How much time did you learn about both, or have to increase your knowledge around the Catholic side of this, your story and your character? Tell me a little bit about your research.
So I was not brought up Orthodox. I was brought up a Reformed Jew in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I went to public schools, and I knew Catholic. So I wasn't from one of those enclaves/ghettos in Brooklyn. So the theology, and I'd taken this frequent references to Comparative Religions 101 in college. So I had passing familiarity with Catholicism. Lev and Angela tend to debate a lot their different faiths. But I have to say that the amount of in the book devoted to seriously thinking about the tenets of Catholicism is very small. So I didn't have to do a lot of research about that. It's mostly Angela. It's mostly Lev's not so well informed attitudes towards Catholicism that come out in the book. The Jewish aspects of the book, I had to do an enormous amount of research because the title of the book is called The Evil Inclination. In Judaism, there is this idea that every person has an evil urge or inclination and a good urge or inclination, and that these forces are in conflict and they struggle with one another. And so there are numerous references and declarations by the rabbis that essentially define modern Judaism. They lived 2,000 years ago, around the time of Jesus, and the time that the Second Temple was destroyed. They are the ones who essentially put together the Talmud, which, as I mentioned, has 5,400 pages in it. Takes in my library, it's probably 28 volumes, and they're big, and it's written in Aramaic. So it's not an easy. Learning the Talmud is not an easy skill to acquire. But over the years, I became Orthodox after college, so I've been Orthodox more than 50 years. Over the years, I acquired the ability to read it and understand it, at least with translation, with some help with translation. So I used an index to essentially research every instance in those 5,400 pages in which the rabbis discuss the evil inclination. And the novel is broken into 9 parts, and each one is introduced by an excerpt from the Babylonian Talmud. It's what it's called, Babylonian Talmud. And Lev, the Jewish protagonist, has a knack or a talent for remembering a lot of the Talmud that he has studied, and it tends to intrude sometimes in embarrassing situations, as if the rabbis are in sporadic conversation with him, often telling him not to do the things that he is doing, particularly with his girlfriend, Angela. Mm-hmm. So I did do a lot of research on that aspect.
For Lev's side, did Angela's side of the story, were they receptive to Lev as a character and as a relationship? Or was there any kind of struggle between families with other families and two cultures coming together?
Well, there's certainly a struggle with the two cultures. The families their relationship is secret. So they keep it from their families and from their friends. That's part of the agreement that they forge. And Angela is as intent at keeping her relationship with Lev secret as he is keeping his relationship with her. You might not think so, but no, she doesn't want to be seen going out with an Orthodox Jew. However, Angela comes with all sorts, with tremendous ignorance about what it means to be observant, an observant Jew, and certainly as much ignorance as Lev brings to what it means to really be a Catholic, notwithstanding the fact that Bensonhurst borders Borough Park, which is probably among the most orthodox neighborhoods in all of certainly all of New York. But nevertheless, she really doesn't get it, and a lot of their discussion has to do with her being skeptical of the whole thing and incredulous that you mean to say you have to pray 3 times a day? You mean to say you don't use the cell phone on the Sabbath? What's with you? And, he's less interested. He's less interested in finding out what she believes because she's much more casual about it. Dave, I was quite worried about Catholic readers in particular, but Christian readers because I didn't want this to be. It wasn't an indictment of Catholicism so much as a dissection of Lev's ambivalence. Whenever I have a book club, I ask Christian readers, I said, what is your reaction? Were you offended? No, not at all. No, it's fine. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people of faith understand the challenges and they're more interested in Lev's journey than in Angela's. Because Angela, as I said, is much more casual about her beliefs than he is.
Yeah.
So I was very relieved.
So if you had the opportunity to sit down with Angela and Lev, the two of them together sitting across from you at your desk there, and you're able to ask them a question that you don't know the answer to from an author's perspective, you get to sit down with your characters. Do you have a question for the two of them that would be of interest to you, you're curious about of your character?
It's funny you say that because I totally agree with you that just because an author creates characters doesn't mean he knows everything about them. And right. I find that a lot of readers are disappointed when I say that, and they don't quite believe it. Part of the reason is because I've read the sequel, and almost everyone wants to know what happened to them. There is I don't want to give away the spoiler, but at the end of the novel, there is a tremendous question as to what happens to these two people as they go into the future. And so when I tell people that I've written a sequel, they say, "Well, what happened? Did they do this? Did they do that?" And I said, "Well, you know what? When I finished the book, I really didn't know. I had to make a choice in writing the sequel, but I can't say with confidence that's definitely what would happen going forward."
Interesting.
Because, it's like life. People do things all the time that your whole life, and they surprise you. You do things, I do things, then I'm saying, why did I do that? So why not a character that you've created, right?
Yeah, I love that. I love to get into the mind of an author to realize as a reader that you, as an author, don't have all the answers to character development and the story plot, and that you're finding out new things about your characters even as you write. Definitely. I find that to be very curious.
I'm not a writer that blocked out the entire novel and then started writing it. I just want to close. I don't know if you can hear the jackhammers. Let me just close the window.
Sure.
That should be better.
There you go.
Yeah, that's, I know that I think when you write mysteries or sci-fi and things like that, you really need to know exactly what's going to happen. Because they're enormously plot-driven. It's not the way I wrote this novel, although this novel does have a fairly intricate plot. But I tend to start with just a vague notion of the characters, and I put them in dialogue. So I write an enormous amount of dialogue. And as the dialogue evolves, the characters tend to evolve as I imagine what they're talking about. So the way I started with this novel was to have a Catholic girl and a Jewish guy who know very little about each other's backgrounds, essentially start talking and to a certain extent sparring and flirting. And from that, the characters more or less emerged. And one of the things that also helped drive the plot was as I started folding in these Talmudic stories about the Evil Inclination, they tended to find kind of an echo in what was happening in the novel. And to a certain extent, each part reflects kind of the essence of the Talmudic quote, which introduces it. So
it's amazing. It's an interesting story. I'm excited. I know a copy of the book. It's on its way to me, and I can't wait to get it, to read it as well. For your community that have been there supporting you, Daniel, they've been here reading your book, purchasing your books, being there in your community to support you. Do you have any words to your community as they listen to this podcast episode and hear you on the microphone?
Well, I don't want to be self-serving, but
go ahead. You wrote a book.
One interesting thing that's happening in addition to the sequel is I almost completed an audiobook version. And the book itself, many people have told me, and I agree, the book is very cinematic. It would make a wonderful film or it'd make a wonderful series. Because these protagonists are in so much dialogue, the narration in the audiobook, we really worked hard. I'm not narrating it. I have a professional doing it. Worked hard to capture their voices, particularly the voice of Angela. And this is a book in which it's a close third-person narrator to Lev, the male protagonist. But Angela is the character that emerges, I think, most vividly for many readers. And so I chose to have a female narrator because I really felt it was important to capture her voice. She's kind of a brassy kind of Brooklyn,
bigger than life.
Bigger than life.
Yeah.
I tried to not make her stereotyped, but it's interesting when you have a talented audiobook narrator. They give it their own interpretation, and I'm listening to the drafts as she's producing them, and I'm noticing things that she found in the text that I didn't. And so I would encourage people who've read the book and liked it to also listen to it, because I think it'll really bring it even more to life. These two indelible characters.
What's it like to hear the voice of your characters in audio? That must be an interesting experience for you as an author. It really
is. It's of course I had an idea about what they would sound like, and it's funny when you talk to these audiobook narrators, they say, well, what performance in a movie would you say Angela is? So you start thinking and you say, well, she's not Marissa Tomei in My Cousin Vinny, because that's just over the top.
Yeah.
On the other hand, maybe she's Cher in Moonstruck, or maybe she's Carmela in The Sopranos, or a combination. And ultimately, you work with your narrator and come up with something that is plausible. But, a narration is not a reenactment. It's not an enactment of the book. Some of them are. Some of them where they actually have sound effects in it. It's almost as if, I didn't want that. The book is, I thought that would not do the book justice. I'm very excited about that. It should be done in a month or 6 weeks.
Excellent. And will that be a link on your website? Yes,
of course.
Then,
and
as far as how to find the
Audible, and I'll send it out and try to get much attention as I can.
I love audiobooks because it allows you to freeze you up to do something else in the moment, and you can come back and listen anytime. For those who are listening to our podcast, they might not be able to read due to whatever is happening with them personally. They might not be able to actually read a book, but to hear an audiobook brings them into the space and allows them to participate. So I love when an author has an audiobook of their books. That's a great idea. Really good. So the next book after this, do you have a timeline for us at all?
I'm hoping to bring it out in June of 2024. So I'm working hard to do that.
Excellent. So you have a lot of work ahead of you. It's great. So Daniel, take us to your website so that we can go there and follow along on your journey as an author. Tell us where we can connect with you. And I'd like to ask you one last question as we kind of wrap up. But take us through the website. I have it up on my screen while we're chatting. I would love to send everybody there. Where do we go?
Well, it's daniel-victor.com is the website. I'm actually updating it now because I want to add a reference to the audiobook. I've also won a number of awards with this book, including the North Street Book Grand Prize for fiction, which it was awarded the grand prize over 1,800 competing works. I want to try to do that. And the website is like a typical author's website. It describes the book, praise for the book, which I'm also, there's a number of reviews which are not on the website now, and a little bit about me, and also a reader's guide, because I find that I think this is a very good book for book clubs. The number of book clubs that I've done, the people feel passionately about the book. They feel passionately about the characters. So it tends to be a lively discussion. And I wrote a reader's guide, which gives people points to think about prior to a book club. So that's in there.
Nice. That's a great addition. I don't see that on many author websites. And I think that's a great idea for authors as well, to get that as a sense of, and maybe as a guide that you could include on your website. That's a great idea, Daniel.
Thank you.
Excellent. And all your contact information is there. And like you said, the audiobook links will be there so you can follow along on that. That's great. My last question, Daniel, as we kind of wrap up, for you, my podcast is called Living the Next Chapter. And we kind of alluded to this already with the new work coming. But for you as an author, I'd like to know how you are living your next chapter, whether that's your new book, your writing career, what's next for you personally, anywhere you want to go with this answer. But how are you living your next chapter?
Well, I never dreamed that I would be devoting my time to writing, but that's more or less what I do. I mean, I studied the Talmud. I'm with my family. My wife continues to work as a college professor. So, when I finish the sequel, I have another novel which I want to bring out, and then a collection of short fiction. I feel like I'm in my early 70s, so I feel like I got to rush a little bit. I started late. Spit it all out, and now I have to whip it into shape. The amount of time it takes for me. The amount of time it took to write the first draft is negligible compared to the amount of time it takes to really rework it and get it in shape and, be pleased with it. And unfortunately, I have a lot of friends who are either just attentive readers or they're actually craftsmen. They know how to write. They've written professionally, and I get a lot of great feedback. I mean, that's one of the things. If you can have a writing community, it really, really makes a difference, particularly if you're writing long form fiction. Yeah. You can ask anybody to read 5 pages, but ask someone to read 350 pages and sit down and discuss it. You have to invest a lot of time to find people that are willing to do that and whose opinion counts to you, because I think that makes the novel better.
Excellent. Daniel, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you,
for being
Dave.
Part of the show. For the listeners, as you listen, as you go out and buy The Evil Inclination by Daniel Victor, please leave an amazing review for Daniel so he understands why the book resonated so well with you as a reader. It also tells other people how amazing The Evil Inclination is. We want to sell more books. We want more people to come and fall in love with Daniel and his work. So you simply leaving a great review help Daniel to reach more people. So please do that as you purchase the book. Daniel, again, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Come back in the future and let's talk about the next thing. All right?
Okay. Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Everyone, all the information is always in the show notes. Daniel, thank you so much.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for listening to Living the Next Chapter. I'm glad you stayed all the way to the end. You're my new bestie. And the one thing I like to do with my besties is enjoy time together over a cup of coffee. Now, one thing missing in the equation is my coffee cup is empty. And what I would love if, after 390 plus episodes roughly, if you found any value in the podcast and you want to say, hey, Dave, do you need a refill of your coffee cup? I'm looking at it right now, and you know what? It's looking kind of sad. There's not much in the coffee cup. If you want to help support the podcast, I would love you forever as besties and celebrate coffee with you. You can celebrate and support the show at our website using our Buy Me a Coffee link. And all the money goes back into the podcast. And we also like to give it to other podcasters. So if you want to support the show, head over to livingthenextchapter.com and let's top it up. Thank you guys. Thanks for listening. Cheers.